Hey, what is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel yet again. Today we are going to be continuing on the how to recreate the App Store tutorial series. And in this video, we're going to be talking about how to utilize a REST service that returns JSON data and how to integrate that inside of your application so that you can utilize it to power your collection views, views inside of your app. So if you guys have missed that first part of the series, visit the link down below for part one and make sure you watch that before moving on to this. Or if you are just interested in how REST and JSON and model objects work together to form an app, you can just follow along. You should be fine as well. So let's get back to where we are at in the application. And we have a collection view with horizontal apps. They're all hard-coded inside of each cell. And we want to get to a state where we have a application with a couple of rows here that are dynamic in content. And also each cell contains its own name, category, and a price label at the very bottom down below. And let's start by not actually going into what the REST service is, but we first need to construct what we call model objects that contain some of the more specific logic to what the business side of the application is. So namely, what we're talking about here are the apps and the app categories for our app here. So an app category is a horizontal row right here. It has a name of best new apps, and then it has an array of apps inside of each cell here. So we want to define these two objects. So for example, app category and apps inside of our code right here. Now the standard that a lot of iOS developers follow is to create a models folder. So I'm just going to create a models file in here, and I'm going to import UIKit, and I'm going to define all my model objects inside of this file. So for example, I want to create something called app category and subclass that as an NS object. And now we want to define two properties on here. First is a name for the category. And then here we want to define an array of apps like this. So an array of apps. And we need to define what an app is. So class app, and this will also be an NS object. And here we define a couple of properties on an app. For example, an app has a name, the string, and usually model objects also contain an ID to be used in a post request. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So specify that as an NS number, and here we'll also say category. It's also a string. And finally, we will say price for the app, which is also an NS number. And we also have something called an image name for the app. So this is the image name here. And then we have the name, category, and then the price for this entire app cell right here. Now to quickly illustrate what we want to build out, I'm going to run this application here, and then you'll see that same screen just to show you that we are in a state that is workable. Now, I want to create just one of these cells and one of these entire rows just to illustrate how we want to integrate the REST service. And what I mean is I'm going to go to the view controller here. And remember, this is the featured apps view controller, which contains all these three rows right here. And let's just say this. We want to create a way to power this collection view by the number of categories. So a quick way of saying that is to establish an array called app categories, like this, and use an optional there. And we want to specify what this category is, or what this array will contain. And I'm going to do that very, very casually here. Typically, you won't see this type of logic, but just to illustrate my point, I'm going to create a static function just to call it from my view controller. And this will be a function that says, okay, sample app categories here. And then I'm going to return an array of app categories like this. So let me just create a sample app category. So this will be best new apps category equals app category. And this will contain a name that says best new apps. And here we need to create a list of apps. So apps is an array of apps like that. And we'll need some logic here. And then we will say best new app category apps. Let's see. Okay, so this needs to be apps here. And then here we'll actually set that to the apps that we create. And now we'll just return an array of those categories like that. Cool. So what do we need to do here? Okay, we need that. And then let's just use a let here. Okay, so now I want to create some apps, and I'm just going to create one, and this is going to be the frozen build-it app here. So let app equals, well, let's just give it a better name. Frozen app equals app like that. App.name. Let's see. App.name is, in this case, it'll be Disney build it frozen, and then we'll say frozen dot image name is frozen app dot category is, in this case, is entertainment, and then the final property will be the price, which will be an endless number. We'll use a float initializer as $3.99 for the price. And here we'll say, okay, apps.append frozen app. And now we get one category that contains one app inside of the apps array up here. Now that I have that, I'm just going to build. And let's do this. App categories up here is equal to app category dot sample app categories. Now that I have this set up as my kind of my data source for the collection view, I can return the count on this array as the number of cells. So namely, we're talking about number of items in section here, and we can sort of return the count like this. And what I mean is app categories dot count, and because that's an optional, it's going to complain, and we have to just safely unwrap it like this. Let's return the count there, and then if there's nothing inside of there, we just return 0. So now that we have that, we're going to see the exact same screen, but only one row for the for the verticality of this collection view. And that's because we only have one category inside of app categories, and then app categories returns a count of 1 right here. Pretty straightforward. Hope you guys are still kind of with me. Now, in order to change this this collection view to return 2 categories, we are going to create another category here really quickly. So let's just do this. Let's do a let and create this best new games category. The best new games category is app category. Best new games, let's see, best new games category name is best new games. And then let's create another set of apps. So, well, let's just say this. Var new games, say best new games apps is an array of apps like so. And then we'll create an app that will say, okay, name of telepaint. So let telepaint app equal app, and telepaint app, that name is telepaint. And then we use the category of games And then the price will be let's see, NS number, float to 99. Okay, so best new game apps, we'll append this telepaint app here. And then we will do this. Best new games category, that apps equal best new games apps. And here we'll just return this appended array, which will be that. Now I'm doing this so that I can illustrate what this image or what this category name should be per row. And what I mean is I want to actually set this name label here with the category's name. And remember, this cell right here, this whole entire horizontal cell is an app category cell. So this category cell here. And what I want to do is when I dequeue this cell here, I want to set the category onto that cell. So what I mean is I want to do something like this, which doesn't really work yet. And let's see, app categories. Well, let's use this. Apps, let's see, index path dot item. I want to be able to do something like this to specify the app category. And it's complaining because I don't have a property on the cell yet, which I'm going to create right here. Let's do this. Var app category, and let's use this did set to execute some logic here. Okay, we need an optional there, and then we should be good to go. So I'm going to build that. And now to illustrate what I mean is I'm going to say if let name equals app.name or app category dot name. I'm going to say name label dot text. Let's get rid of this. Okay, equals name. So I'm going to run that, and then we'll see exactly what that does with the the category name right there. So best new apps for this row, and then best new games for the second row, which maps exactly what we want inside of the sample app categories. So as you can see, it's easy to fill out the amount of cells and what the cells say when we have what we call model objects. And specifying logic here keeps it very clean and not messy so that you don't know what you're doing later on. It's one of the best practices that is followed in the industry here. Now, let's go one step further and specify what goes inside of this entire row of apps. So namely, we want to fix this so that it's no longer hard-coded to this frozen app and include the telepaint app on the bottom and this default app up here. Now, I'm going to do that by doing this. Staying inside of category cell here, we have this entire horizontal scrolling collection view. We've specified apps collection view as that collection view right there. And we want to use the number of apps inside of our category to specify how many apps are in there. So I'm going to do that very, very simply by doing this. Okay, so return app category dot apps dot count is what we want to do, but we need to unwrap that safely, just like what we did before by saying if let count equal that, and we'll return the count down there and return 0 otherwise. Now, running that, we'll get 2 rows and then 1 app per row like that. So let's specify also what goes inside of this cell here. And in order to do that, we will specify an app property on app cell. So what I mean is we'll do this, var app, and then did set just like the other property up here. As you can see, the logic that I'm following is pretty consistent, and hopefully you guys can follow along. Now, upon setting that app, we'll say this, name label dot text equals app dot name like that, and then we should be good to go. Okay. Before everything can work properly, we'll also have to downcast this cell for item at index path method as, let's see, app cell.app is equal to app category dot apps, and then we'll specify the index path, the item there. Finally, returning the cell for the collection view to render the proper item. Now we see that we're getting a lot closer to what we want, and Disney Build It, the name is changing. The name is changing here, and let's also change the category. So I want to actually unwrap this just to save it a little bit later here. Okay. Okay. And that'll just be name there. All right. Now the category label, we'll say app.category. And then the price label will say this. So let's do something a little differently here. And it's not too difficult, but we should unwrap the price so that we can set a dollar sign on the left of it like this. So what I mean is, if I just simply say price label dot text equals app.price dot string value, we only get the floating point value into a string like that, and we need a dollar sign. So we do that very easily by saying if let price equals app.price like that, and then price label dot text is this dollar sign, and then we'll interpolate this value inside of there. And otherwise, price label dot text will be an empty string because some apps in the App Store are actually free, and they list that by specifying a blank value. What I mean is, it is completely blank right there, and there as well. So let's go back to this app and determine a couple of other things. We want to change the image inside of this cell here. So we will do that finally by saying image view.image equals UI image named something. And that will be a image name. And let's just safely unwrap that here. It's always good to unwrap your optionals so that you can safely access the properties like that. Okay, now if I run that, that cell will be empty because we don't have the asset. Well, it's not empty now, but let me just remove that there. It's being set hard code. Okay, so it's blank there, and that's because I haven't yet imported this telepaint icon there. And there we go. Running that one more time, we get the app, well, kind of specified in there. Let's see, what are we missing? Let's go back to our models. And then this telepaint app is missing the image name like that, telepaint. And hopefully we should be good to go. Running that app one more time, we see that the telepaint icon is now appearing as we would hope it to do so. Okay. So now that we have our model object set up, we can use a REST service or REST API to integrate what the server should return to us and what the app should display. So typically, if you're an iOS developer, you have someone else working on a server side to produce the JSON that your iOS app should be consuming. Now, let's look at one sample of what this REST service should look like. And I'm going to Alt-Tab into Chrome and show you the service that is actually powering this application right here. And Banner Apps is just this top row here, and we can safely kind of ignore that for this video for now. And we want to look at the important categories object here. And this node provides us with this, this category here. And this is accessed through this URL here. I'll link that down below, and you can also access the final project if you want to run this application. So an app category contains a name, which is here, and then an array of apps, which is specified by this bracket here. And each array, or each app inside of that array, is just each icon and each name down here. So we have the same properties that we've specified in our model objects. So it's not a coincidence that this has happened. It's through design that you specify the properties and that the server should return those properties. So it requires a bit of architecture and a bit of design so that all the right or all the necessary parts come into play and mesh well together. Now, if I untwirl, let's twirl this guy up, untwirl the second one, we get best new games, and it contains the exact same type of data structure with apps or an array of apps, and then the apps in there with the name, category, price, and image name. So I'm going to show you this last one here. It's almost the same thing, but it has a type of large and displays this row right here. So I'm going to use that a little bit later to show you how to render that cell. Okay, and one last thing, if you visit this URL and you need to print it out nicely like this, you need to download an extension such as JSON View to do what we call pretty print on the JSON so that it's easily legible or readable in the Chrome browser. All right, so having said that, let's now use this REST service here to power our collection view. What I mean is I want to include the rest of the apps inside of this row here, and I want to avoid calling this sample apps category method to create this like false, this hard-coded value of apps. And to do that, I'm going to illustrate how to first get the JSON data from that web service by simply calling this. Okay. Static function, and we'll do this fetch featured apps, and we'll do this for now. Okay, in here I'm going to let URL string equal a string, and that string will be this right there, and we'll use an NS URL session like that, shared session data task with URL and the completion handler, and this URL will be this. Okay, NS URL string, URL string, and then we need to unwrap it like that. Enter data, response, error, and then let's just call resume right there. Okay, looks pretty good. And if error is something, we'll just print it out and quickly return out of this block. Now, this data that we've consumed from this REST API here is in what we call Json format, which is a tree structure like this. You should be somewhat familiar with it, I'd hope. And here's how we parse that in here. So what I mean is, if I do this here, JSON equals NSJSON serialization, JSON object with data, unwrap the data like that, and use mutable containers, which is a confusing name, but don't worry too much about that. And now it's going to complain that we need a try here. And when you do a try like that, you always need to capture it with a catch block like this. Let's print out the error. And let's see, paste that in there. The reason is because try is potentially going to throw an error, and we catch that here. Don't worry too much about that. That's just a syntax that you need to kind of get used to. So in order to get to this categories node right there and get the apps, we do that simply by saying this. So categories, like that. We'll get to this bit right here, and then we will do this. Okay, we'll actually loop over it by saying dictionary in that array, and this will need to cast down to an array of dictionaries like this. Okay, so now that each one of these categories are kind of casted as a dictionary like that, we need to do one very simple thing. And let's see, where are we? Okay. So to parse this value into one of our model objects, we will just create an app category like this. And then we'll call set values for keys with dictionary, and this will just be the dictionary like that. And here we'll create an array of app categories so that we can pass it back a little bit later. And like that. And okay, app categories dot append app category. I'm not sure why my completion is not working. Okay, so let's just print out what app categories is at the very end. And I think we're good. Let's see. Okay, I want to fix one issue before I move on, and that is to actually include this type string there. And maybe I'll go into why I kind of need that a little bit later on. Okay, so everything still works, and I just need to call this method here from an outside class like viewController. And so let's get rid of this call to sample app categories and call app category dot fetch featured apps. I'll click in there, and let's see what we get. So this warning or error message, I suppose, is going to need a little bit of fixing here. And to do that, we add a thing there, use this transport security. Okay, we're good. And then add another little thing there. And then we call something like allow. What is it called? Okay, now, so we'll get rid of that guy first. This guy's always a little confusing. That thing there. Okay, allow arbitrary loads, and this needs to be set to yes. Having done that, we're going to be able to bypass that error message. And basically that message is telling us that because this is an HTTP website, not an HTTPS, we need to be a little bit cognizant of the fact that it's not entirely safe. So because this is just a tutorial video, you don't need to worry so much about that. All right, now look at what we have here. So this JSON was able to successfully parse this this return value from the web service, and we went through the dictionary in a very easily manner by just setting these values for key with dictionary. And because we have a breakpoint there, we can inspect what is inside of this app categories array by looking at some of this data here. Now, one thing that I want to fix as well is the fact that apps, this array of apps, which is up here, is saying that I have NS dictionaries inside of the apps. And that's actually not what I want. You see all the properties that are there, but I want this to be an app object instead of a dictionary. And we do that very simply by saying this. So set value, and then if key is equal to apps, we'll do something. And this will just call set value from the super, set value, key. And we need to do something special here. So what I mean is, when I encounter this key called apps, which will be a string, we'll do some extra special initialization to produce an array of apps. And it's really easy by doing this. Okay, so for dict in value as an array of dictionaries. So very similar to what we did before. And in here, we'll say this. Okay, let app equal a new app, and we'll call app set values for dictionary again. Okay, and in here we'll say apps is a new array of app. So we want to instantiate an array, and in here we just append these app little guys onto that, and we should be good to go. So I'll run that one more time, and you'll see that app categories will now contain these apps here with these properties. So I don't want to mess too much with dictionaries because they're not entirely safe, and having those properties allow me to be confident that the values will be returned properly. Now I'm going to get rid of this. Well, let's see what that prints out. Okay, a bunch of app categories from our web service, and that looks pretty good. Now, because we are inside of a block here, what I mean is this data task with URL has this completion handler, and we need to somehow get access to these app categories inside of our view controller here. So notice we just called this method, and we need to do something called a completion handler is what we need to write. And what I mean is at the very end of this setup work here, I'm going to call a completion handler. So first let me write it out. Completion handler with this thing called app categories. And I'm going to have to execute this on the view controller somehow. And we do that by saying this, okay, completion handler. And then it is going to execute on a property called, I guess it's not really called anything. It is just a block that takes in an app category or an array of app categories, and then we can operate on that how we please. So I'm just going to call dispatch async on this, and don't be too concerned as to how this actually works, but because we are calling data tasks, we're on a background thread, and iOS requires you to get back onto the main thread to start updating your collection view. Specifically, what I'm talking about is when I'm calling this here, so fetch apps, let's build my app there, get completion handler, enter, and this will be app categories. So now I'm going to call self collection view.reload data, and we need to be back on the main thread to make sure this executes properly. All right, now I'm going to build one more time. We should be good. So the question now is, how do we set up this app categories? And the way we do that is to very simply say self.appCategories is this thing here, which conveniently is called the same thing. I suppose you can call it something else, but it works for us in this scenario. And notice how we have all of these apps now. Scroll down, we have more apps. So what's missing is the app icon for each one of those individual cells. And the reason for that is because our assets do not yet contain all these image names like Dine, Today, and Spot for those apps. And let's go back to the asset catalog and now import a couple of these apps or app icons there. We'll take that, I suppose. I guess we'll take all these as well. And then those as our app icons. Running that, now we have the entire application set up with all of this good stuff. And one issue, I guess, right now that I see is that this right here still says Disney Build It Frozen and all this other stuff. Or the name's wrong is essentially what I'm trying to say. So we'll fix that in probably a later video. And I want to address a couple of things before we move on. And I guess we'll just get rid of that. And then the method that, well, I guess we'll leave it if you want to take a look at it inside of the completed project later on. So let's take a look at these names here, the category and the price label. And what I am pointing out here, or trying to, is that this name and this category, they're not lined up properly. What I mean is, I want to achieve precise alignment with the name and the category and the price, so that when there are two lines for the name here, and when it ends in a truncation ... ellipses, I want to make sure that the category is directly below that name label, and then the price should go directly underneath that category label. And the App Store, if you open up your iPhone, will have that exact layout. And so I'm going to go back to what we have so far. And you notice how that is not the case with the current setup, So it works for this top row, but once we get to the second row with shorter game names, that effect, or this empty blank white space starts to come in, and we need to fix that by doing a couple of things. So if you remember where we're at, or where this app cell is at, it's called app cell. Hopefully I've named this so that you guys can follow along. And instead of that app cell, we specified a lot of these recs or frames that specify where these labels land. So I'm going to copy these 3 labels and their positioning, and I'm going to apply the kind of reapply the layout just a little bit when I set the app onto the cell and I know what the actual name is. So let's, I guess we'll remove these lines here. Let's use this this name block here, and because now I know the name of the application, I can actually figure out how tall it will be inside of the cell. And we'll do that by doing this. Let rect equals and a string. Let's see, string. And this will be the app name like that. And we use bounding rect with size. For this, we need to provide a size that is going to have a width of frame.width. And then this can be 1,000. That's the value that I normally use. String drawing options. We'll be using font leading, and we'll have to union it with another option, which is line fragment origin. And this will be NS font attribute name. Anyway, font system font of size. So that label has a font size of 14 is what I believe. 14 there, yep. And for context, let's see, context we specify nil. And there we go. So the drawing options is a little confusing, but just make sure you include these 2 options. And there we go. So now that we have this rect, we can tell if it's bigger than 1 line or not by simply saying rect.height greater than 20. This is when we have a 2-line label for the name. And then in the else case is when we have just 1 line. So let's see, I'm going to paste these 3 blocks here. And let's see, I think I can remove this guy. And then I can also remove that guy. So let's just say this. Okay. And I want to illustrate what happens once I have a 1-liner name label. And I want to call name label size to fit to show you exactly what we have to do to make this work. Oof. All right. So it looks like my app, similar, kind of crashed. And I'm just going to reload it. So size to fit is called to redraw the label's name. And when I call size to fit, notice how the label kind of pushed up a little bit and is no longer in the center of its frame. And up here you can see it's a little tighter to the app image. So we'll fix that by bumping down the Y value, which is this, by, let's see, maybe 2 pixels. And run that, see if we like what we see. So it's close. Maybe 5 is a better value. I don't really like landing on odd values like that, but it seems like it's a little better. So now I want to push these 2 labels up if it's a one-liner, and that's in this else case here. So let's push this, I don't know, up 20 pixels. Let's see, I think some of these values that might work are 20 and 40, but we'll see if my memory serves me well here. So let's see, it's a little higher than I would hope. And let's push this down 2 pixels. So it's not actually important what exactly those pixel values are, as long as you get the idea as to how to achieve a cleaner layout and alignment with these labels here. And I don't know if you recall, but in the first video, I didn't use NS layout constraints because that's really hard to achieve. Truncated ellipses like this and this here, and then trying to make sure that the alignments are proper. And it's possible if you use height constraints, but it's definitely not worth your time if you can easily manipulate recs like this. It's a lot easier, trust me. Okay. So now that we have our apps kind of powered by our, let's see, going to Chrome. This REST service powers this entire collection view now. So that's how you would consume a REST service inside of your iOS app to dynamically load content inside of your cells. So imagine you have a server person that's working on developing this server code here, and you need to consume some type of data. You guys have to come together and agree on what exactly the API on the REST side of things should return. And if you collaborate and develop these model objects so that they make sense in terms of what your app content should contain, it's not going to be too hard to create the architecture so to support this further down the road when you need to start modifying your application to support additional features. And this is what we call a separation of model objects and then the view controller, the presentation layer, and making sure your application is tight and neat so that people looking at it further down the line, maybe a year from now, can actually make sense of everything that's going on. All right, that was quite the video, and hopefully you guys can get a better idea as to how to design your next app to make it easy and more manageable. Okay, if you guys want to watch a kind of like the written form of this guide, I'm going to provide a link maybe here or down below to my website on how to construct all of this stuff. And then the final project code will be available in that link as well. So hopefully you enjoyed. Make sure to like the video and subscribe if you guys are interested in other videos like this. In the next video, I think I'm going to go over how to create this top layer cell here, and then this cell here, and finally we might go into this menu item down there, or we can look at this detailed page and how the REST API interacts with this to provide the details. And then let's see if I scroll here, and everything looks good. Good. Okay, yeah. That's about it. Enjoy your day. Goodbye.